أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله العليم الحكيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي علم القرآن وخلق الإنسان والذي نزل الكتاب على قلب محمد ليخرجنا من الظلمات إلى النور نحمده ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. All praise and thanks are due to Allah, who is Al-Alim Al-Hakim, the knowing, the wise. And all praise is due to Allah, who is the Rabb, the developer, evolver, sustainer of all that exists, the one who taught the Quran and created the human beings, and who gradually revealed the Quran onto the heart of his prophet and servant Muhammad, his servant and prophet, put it in that order, Abduhu wa Rasuluhu, his servant and prophet Muhammad, so that he could take us out, yukhrijana min adh-dhulumati ila nur, from darknesses into the light, into the singular light of Allah, wallahu nur, Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. Before I start the topic, and I'm not sure if anybody knows what it is except this smile, I want to preface the topic with some things that inshallah will help you to understand or get some background to what I want to say. So how I want to preface this is to remind myself and all of us here about the reality, the fundamental reality, one of the fundamental realities of our deen, which is the aspect of the kitab, the book. And it is something that we are required to have in our iman. When we say what we believe in, when we say amantu billah, I believe in Allah, and then I go on, but one of the things I must believe in is kitabihi, his book, wa kutubihi, his books. So the reality of this book is what Allah says of the book, in the book. So the reality of the Quran is what Allah says about the Quran in the Quran. So I'm just going to use 4 of the things, because there's so many ayat in the Quran that are about the Quran or about the kitab that you can use them and teach on them. I've been teaching a class for 10 years, and I think we might have reused in maybe 2 or 3 ayat in those 10 years. I do it just once a month, but still 10 years, you figure like 120 months, minus 1, because there was 1 month when we didn't have the class. But 119 months, and we have not exhausted all that Allah Ta'ala has said about the Quran in the Quran. So I just want to use 4, and I'm putting them in the order of their of the numbers of the surah. So the first one that I want to put forth comes from Surah to Yusuf, which is Surah 12. And that is right at the beginning of that surah, which is an Alif Lam Ra surah. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام را تلك آيات الكتاب المبين. These are the ayah, the signs of a book that is clear. Mubin, clear. And in that aspect of Mubin, it is clear and it clarifies. So this is a book that makes all things clear to us, that anything that we might have been confused about or knowledge that we weren't sure about, the Quran is here to clarify that and make it clear. So it is Kitab al-Mubin. So that's one thing. Second one is in Surah al-Isra. And this is towards the end of Isra, which is like ayah 105, when Allah Ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَبِالْحَقِّ أَنزَلْنَاهُ وَبِالْحَقِّ نَزَلْ. And with haqq, we cause this to come down bil-haqq, with truth, with absolute truth, with rights and with obligations. Those are the aspects of haqq, in the way that Allah uses this word haqq in the Quran, that it has these 3 aspects: truth, absolute truth, rights and obligations. So Allah says, وَبِالْحَقِّ أَنزَلْنَاهُ. We caused it to come down with these qualities. وَبِالْحَقِّ نَزَلْ. And with haqq is the way that it came. So Allah is letting us know that when this book left His presence in the possession of Jibreel, that nothing happened to this book from the time that it left Allah to the time that it got to humanity. It came as it was when it left Allah. So we know then that everything in this book is directly from Allah. No insertion, no changes, nothing different. The third thing is from Surah Yasin, again right at the beginning of Yasin, when Allah Ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم. Allah Ta'ala is taking an oath by the Quran, by the noble recitation, that He gives the attribute of Hakim, being wise, which is one of His own names, and He has imbued the Quran with this aspect of Hakim, that the Quran is wise. So everything let me finish the last one. So the last one is Surah Al-Sad, which is Surah 38. So Yasin is 36, Surah Al-Sad is 38. And this again is at the beginning. Surah Al-Sad opens with the harf Sad, right? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم صاد والقرآن ذي الذكر. Sad, by this Quran, this noble recitation, full of reminders, full of dhikr, full of reminders, full of things to make you remember. And in that remembrance, there is honoring, there is elevation in our status as human beings. So everything that the Quran has, so it's Quran al-Mubin, it's Quran that has haqq, it's Quran al-Hakim, it's Quran al-Dhikr, full of reminders and reminders. Everything that the Quran has, the Quran is obligated to give to us. That's part of the responsibility of the Quran when He comes, and I say He because Quran is Huwa. When the Quran comes, His obligation is to provide us with everything that Allah has put in there. And the Quran will fulfill that obligation when we come seeking, asking, wanting what He has. He's obligated to give it to us. So these are 4 things I want us to keep in mind. That this book is clear and clarifying, that it is absolute truth, that it is wise, full of wisdom that can make us wise, and that it has so many reminders and things for us to remember. So this is, the name Quran is the name for the oral aspect of the kitab. The kitab is the written document, Quran is the spoken aspect. And this is a noble, powerful recitation that is designed to illuminate the inner self, to put light into the qalb, the heart, to put light into the heart, mind, and the physical brain mind, and to move us into truth. Move us gently, guiding us gently into truth, because the Quran is hudan lil muttaqin. So what I want to speak about with all of that in that context is about the reality of the dhil. The reality, the haqq of the dhil, or the reality of the shadow. So I'm just going to put the word dhil. Dhillu, the shadow. Now we all know what is a shadow, but unless you have studied Quran, you don't know the reality of the shadow. I didn't until I started to pay attention to it. And I've been thinking about this for a couple of years, but where are we? August. Earlier this month, when we had our Quran study, I've been doing this for 10 years now, my topic this time was this reality. So I want to share with you some of what I have come to realize about the shadow from the Quran. Before we get to even what's in the Quran, want to talk about just the general knowledge about the shadow. So in the dictionary, and I wrote down 3 specific things that are coming out of different dictionaries. So in the dictionary it says a shadow is an area that is not illuminated, meaning doesn't have light, or is partially illuminated due to blockage of light. And that blockage of the light is from an opaque object, meaning an object through which light cannot pass, like our own bodies. Normal light doesn't just pass through us. We kind of block it. So the second thing, it said a rough image cast by an object blocking rays of light. This is a shadow. That whatever is blocking the light casts an image, according to the dictionary. The third thing says a dark figure or image cast on the ground or on another surface by a body intercepting the light. So something is getting between the light and the surface, and then that body casts an image on the surface, which is different from shade. So the other thing I want to put out here, because this is, again, part of just the general knowledge or the worldly knowledge about shadow, is the substance of the shadow. So the shadow appears to be two-dimensional, right? It appears like I can see my shadow here on the floor. It appears to have length and width. And in some places, that's what it says about the shadow, that the shadow is 2D, 2 dimensions. But actually, the shadow, you read other places and it tells you it's a 3D object. That it has length, width, and depth. Because the shadow is, you see it on the surface, then that depth, or that third dimension, must be what's coming up towards me, rather than going down into the earth, or to the cement, or whatever wall, whatever it's reflecting on. So, but it is actually, the shadow is a 3D, a three-dimensional object, taking up a certain volume, taking up a certain space. And it says the third dimension is not visible unless or until it projects onto a particular surface. And what it said was that a fog, like if you're in a fog or a light mist, then that will show up the third dimension. Fog shadows, it says fog shadows may look odd to those who are not used to seeing shadows in 3D, or 3 dimensions, okay? And again, there is, even in Quran, which we'll find out, there is a relationship between the shadow and the sun. The general knowledge would tell you that the shadow is created by the sun, but we learn different from that in the Quran. If you didn't know what's in the Quran, that's what you would think, that the light is creating the shadow. That's not what Allah says. So I want to go now into the reality of the shadow in the Quran. We're starting with Surah Al-Ra'd, which is sort of called Thunder, Surah 13. And this is Ayah 15. So maybe anybody who, because I have this as a printed document, and if you would like to have it, you can email me. I'll put my email like on the bottom of the board. In fact, I better do it now because I always forget. Anybody that wants it, you can just email me, and I'll send you the typed document. So the email is thepearlwithin@yahoo. And I'll just say that if you know, on my cover, I wrote Reality of the Shadow Part 1. I'm still learning, and I'm hoping to go back and elaborate on this as I learn from other Islamic sources, and perhaps from, what I learned just in talking to my group, the people in my group. One of the women in my group is architect. And she said when she took her architectural education, they took a whole course on shade and shadow, learning how to draw shade and shadow and what the reality of shade and shadow is. So there's scientific knowledge that may not be general knowledge that people in higher levels of sciences may get. And then there also is Quranic knowledge, which supersedes all of the other knowledge. But there's more knowledge on this than what I have so far. So in Surah Al-Ra'd, in Ayah 15, Allah Ta'ala says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ طَوْعًا وَكَرْهًا وَظِلَالُهُم بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ. And whomever, I'm going to make that clear, whomever, men, this word men, this is real important. I mean, what you learn when you study Quran is that every word has significant meaning. وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاءِ. To Allah, whoever is in the heavens and the earth makes sujood to Allah. And then it says willingly or unwillingly. And then Allah says, وَظِلَالُهُمْ, and their shadows. بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ. So Allah says, whoever is in the heavens and the earth is making sujood, and their shadows also. So the important thing here, several things, but when this ayah comes, speaking about the sujood of the shadows, along with all other beings, it comes after Allah Ta'ala spoke about the fact that the ra'd, the thunder, makes tasbih, وَيُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ, الرَّعْدُ يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ, that the thunder is glorifying Allah with praise. So the thunder is the voice of the lightning, but the thunder, when you hear it, is glorifying Allah. So this comes after that, and then that's the ayah about the thunder is ayah 13, and then ayah 14 speaks about how futile it is for people to call on any other being or any other entity other than Allah. He says in that ayah 14, he says it's like somebody putting out their hand to get water, and you want to bring water to your mouth, but you never get anything. It never reaches. So it's like, it's purposeless, it's pointless. You'll never get anything by calling on anybody else other than Allah. So what Allah is doing in leading up to this particular ayah is calling our attention to the fact that there's a consciousness in the creation, in the thunder, in the voice of the thunder that is glorifying Him with praise, and that anybody doing anything else other than glorifying Allah is just wasting their time. And then He gets here and says everything is making sujood. This is about sajda. And He singles out the shadows. So, and He gives you the time, بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ, in the morning and in the evening. Asal is the time in the later part of the asr. So it's not the early part of the asr, but when you get closer to the maghrib, the asr part, that's asal. And so He's telling you when it's happening. So He's drawing us to a reality that we were not conscious of. That when we're seeing the shadow in its long condition, in the morning and in the afternoon, in the late afternoon, that this is the position of the sujood of the shadow. And that this shadow is doing this willingly. Nothing is forcing the shadow to do the sujood. In fact, the shadow is doing sujood in spite of what the body that's creating the shadow may be doing. So the shadow is tied to something, the shadow is related to something, and regardless of what that entity is doing, the shadow is making sujood. So, and there are not a lot of ayat in the Quran that talk about the sujood of the shadow, but the few that are in there are so powerful. So there's a few others, and the other one I want to mention is from Surah 16, which is Surah An-Nahl, the Surah of the bee. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أولم يروا إلى ما خلق الله من شيء يتفيأ سجدا لله وهم داخرون. So I'm going to do this one first, but even though there's another one. So don't they see that everything, and in this case it's man, not men. And this is something you got to pay attention to. Allah chose a different word here. He put man instead of men. Men, whomever, man, whatever. So it says, don't they see that whatever Allah has created of anything, min shay'in, yatafaya'u, is changing positions, not they, but the shadows, their shadows are changing positions, and in yamini wa an shimal. عن اليمين والشمائل, from the right to the left. Keep changing positions, sujudan lillah, making sujood to Allah. And it says, and they are humble. So all beings, rocks, trees, everything has a shadow. And the shadow is changing position from the right to the left as the sun, which is not the guide or not the creator of the shadow, but the sun as it's, as we're turning and the sun appears to be moving over us from east to west, when that is happening, the shadow is changing position in sujood to Allah. So when you're seeing all this, this is what's happening. That things that are going on in the ghaib or going on in other worlds that we're not aware of, but Allah's telling us what's happening. Then in this changing of position of the shadows, there is the sajda twice a day, and then in between those two sujood that the shadow is making, there are other things that are going on. Because it's changing position, right? Like it says, عن اليمين والشمائل, from the right and the left. Sujadan lillah, making sujood to Allah. وهم داخلون, and they are humble. So the shadow has a character. The shadow first of all, has a consciousness and has a character. And that characteristic, the personality of the shadow is humility, is humble. And why do I say it has a consciousness? Because anything that is making sujood to Allah is aware, is conscious, has a knowledge. And everything that Allah has created has knowledge. That's why we say Rabbil Alameen. We say Rabbil Alameen because in the Alameen, the basis or the root of Alameen is knowledge. That everything that Allah has created has knowledge. So the shadow as a creation of Allah has a knowledge. And the shadow as a creation of Allah has a personality which is humility. That it is humbles himself willingly. So the next ayah after that, from Surah 16, and this is 48 there, after there's 3. So it's 48. So the first one was Surah 13, and it was ayah 15. So now we're in Surah 16, and that was ayah 48. So I'm going to do these next two, which is 49 and 50. So number 49, ayah 49 says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ مِنْ دَابَّةٍ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ وَهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ يَخَافُونَ رَبَّهُمْ مِنْ فَوْقِهِمْ وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ. So this says, and to Allah prostrate whatever is in the heavens and the earth, of the walking, crawling beings, dabat, so things that crawl or things that walk on the earth, and then it mentions malaik, and the angels. And it says, وَهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ, they are not arrogant. So when Allah is saying, well, they are not arrogant, these bugs, these insects, these horses, or whatever things that walk or crawl on the earth, they're not arrogant. The implication there is, so why are you? Right? And then he specifically mentions malaik, wal malaik, and he says, وَهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ, they are not arrogant. He mentions the malaik before he asks the question, before he makes the statement, وَهُمْ لَا يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. So the crawling beings, walking, crawling beings, and the angels, and they're not arrogant. يَخَافُونَ, they have an awe of their Lord, min فَوْقِهِمْ, who is above them. وَيَفْعَلُونَ مَا يُؤْمَرُونَ, and they do what they are commanded to do. So Allah is saying all of these beings are doing what they've been commanded to do. And he mentioned, before he mentioned these other beings, he mentioned the shadows. So the whole thing, all of that says, don't they look at what Allah has created? All things mean shay'in. Their shadows repeatedly shift position from the right to the left, prostrating to Allah, and they're humble. And everything in the heavens and everything on the earth, or whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth, is prostrating to Allah, of the moving creatures and the angels. And they are not, actually, because this hum la yastakbirun, that's in form 10 of the verb, is saying they don't attempt to be arrogant. They're not even trying to move towards arrogance. They're just willingly humble. They fear their Lord above them, and they do what they are commanded. So in the commentaries, and I used 3 commentaries in this preparation of this, Yusuf Ali says there's a lot of mystic meaning here. The fact that Allah uses in the first, in Ayah 13, men instead of ma, he says just in using this word men, that Allah is speaking about beings that have minds, personalities and minds. He calls them animate beings, beings that can move and make choices and things like that. And then when Allah speaks about ma fi samawati, that he's saying whatever, meaning everything, whether you consider it to be animate or not, these stationary beings, the beings that don't seem to have personalities, though, it's questionable as to whether they do or not, because rocks, Allah speaks about the rocks and the different characteristics of the rocks. And, there's some rocks out in Death Valley that move, walk, and nobody's ever seen them do it, but they see their tracks. They see the tracks of the rocks, and they see the tracks intersecting, and seems like they have a rock party out there when nobody's watching them. So there are things that we just don't know. We only know of things that we can't comprehend what Allah tells us. So but everything, including insects, angels, all things are making sujood to Allah. And he mentions specifically, in distinction to all of those beings, the shadows. So he says the shadows are projections of other beings. So the shadow is a projection of what it's coming from, and to some degree dependent on that being for existence. And then it says, but even the shadows are subject to the will and the law of Allah. Even though it's coming from me, and to some degree dependent on my existence for its own existence or his own existence, it is still subject to the laws of Allah, and will obey the laws of Allah even if I don't. And it cannot do anything other than what Allah permits it to do. So we know that the shadows are longest at particular times of the day. In the morning, it says, because when the sun is closer to the surface of the earth, that's when the shadows are longest. So as the sun is coming, over that horizon, the shadows are the longest, and when it's about to set on the other horizon, the shadows are the longest. And so it says these are the 2 times of the sujood that Allah has mentioned. And that in the aspect of sujood, it indicates submission, it indicates humility, and it indicates inability to refuse. The shadow cannot refuse the sajda. And all beings will make a sujood. One of the commentaries said that the sujood of all beings is in the shadow, because whether the being will make sujood or not, the shadow will. So that there's some part of ourselves that we have no control over. That there's some aspect of ourselves, if we even say only our shadow, if only the shadow makes sujood, that's still a projection of myself that will submit to Allah even if the rest of me will not. So the shadows turn from right to left according to the light from above. They humble themselves and prostrate to celebrate the praises of Allah. And they suggest how all beings in life are mere shadows of the actual reality. So if the shadow is a projection of me, then who am I? I'm a shadow or reflection of my Creator, which is Allah. So it says that they suggest how everything is just a shadow or reflection of the reality of Allah, and that we should be turning and moving in accordance with divine light. So the motion of the shadow, this is from another source, a different tafsir. The motion of the shadow from the right to the left is a result, I'm going to say this even though I don't agree with it, is a result of the movement of the sun from the east to the west. The prostrate position of the shadows on the ground is presented as a symbolic illustration of the idea that all creatures are ultimately subjected to the will of Allah, if only existentially. This is the nature of all created beings, that we will submit to the will of Allah. Now, the reason I said that I don't agree with the fact that the movement of the shadow is a result of the movement of the sun, I don't agree with that because of something else that Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. Some commentators have said that the sun is the guide of the shadow. I don't agree with that. This one is saying that the movement of the shadow is created by the sun. I don't agree with that. So it goes on to say the prostrate position of a creature's shadow can be said to represent the inward prostration of the creature to Allah. So even if you don't make an outward or conscious submission to Allah in that position of sujood, there is something innerly that is in constant submission to the will of Allah. That you can't, in fact, the fact that you have the ruh Allah, the fact that we have, you and I, the fact that we have the ruh of Allah in us, which Allah said when He was describing to the angels our creation, He said, this is in Surah Al-Sad. He said, وَإِذَنْ سَوَيْتُهُ, when I have created, shaped and formed him, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, and I breathed into him of my ruh, فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ, then you bow down to him in sujood. So the fact that we each have the ruh of Allah in us, there is an aspect inside of us that is always in submission to Allah. That we have no control over that ruh. We cannot do anything with the ruh. That ruh remains under the command of Allah. Now, I can act any way I like, but I cannot change the ruh. And the ruh will be sad that I'm not submitting myself to Allah, but it knows that I have no power or authority over it. So this is the thing, that there's some aspect of ourselves. So shadows, is said the shadow, over which we don't have control, is said to represent the inward prostration of the creature to Allah. And it also mentioned, in this tafsir, it mentioned the waves of the sea. That said, as the waves come up and then crash down, that's the sujood of the bahr, of the waves of the water. So, and also it mentioned the date tree. So that when the date tree gets a lot of dates on it, it begins to bow. So they said this is, everything has its own manner of sujood, I think is what they're trying to say. So that when you see things, to understand that in some way or the other, because Allah says everything. There's nothing that He has created that is not making a sujood to Allah. So everything that you see, and when you think about your own self, there is something about me and about everyone that I see and about everything that I see that is doing a sujood to Allah Ta'ala. So it also mentioned that there are what are called terrestrial angels, angels on the earth, who they don't live in the heavens, they're here, and those angels are always making sujood regularly to Allah also. Something I wanted to, okay. So in the tafsir of Ibn Kathir, he said Allah is telling us that everything has a shadow that will lean to the right and lean to the left in the morning and the evening. And that by its shadow, that entity, that being, is making sujood. So that one of the companions of the Prophet said, everything, he said when the sun reaches its zenith, everything is prostrating to Allah. Azza wa Jalla. And the prostration of every being is in His shadow. So that everything has that sajda. Okay, so in Surah Al-Furqan, this is the last ayah I think that, and I think this is where it mentions about, yes. In Surah Al-Furqan, Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ألم تر إلى ربك كيف مد ظلا ولو شاء لجعله ساكنا ثم جعلنا الشمس عليه دليلا ثم قبضناه إلينا قبضا يسيرا Don't you see, alam tara, don't you see that looking to Allah, how He stretches out the shadow. He stretches it out, draws it and stretches it. He said, "Walau sha'a," if He had wanted, He would have just made it be still. Just made it so it doesn't move. If He had wanted to, He would just made it sit still. ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَا الشَّمْسَ عَلَيْهِ دَلِيلًا. Then we make the sun, this is Allah, what Allah says, then we make the sun on him, on the shadow, an indicator, dalila. We make the sun an indicator. So Yusuf Ali translated this as He made the sun a guide for the shadow. But when you look up this word, it does mention guide in there. But more than guide, it's that it indicates. So the shadow, what you learn from this, the shadow is there. The sun didn't create it. The shadow is there. The sun is the indicator that it exists. And I said, just think about it. Like when the night comes, if you don't have, if it's real night, like country night, no lights, you could walk into the tree, into a wall, trip over the curb. Why? Because you didn't see it. It's there, but you didn't see it. Your shadow is always there. You just don't see it. It's an energetic projection of yourself. So Allah is saying we made the sun on him, alayhi, dalilan, an indicator on him. So, ثُمَّ قَبَضْنَاهُ, then we draw him in. Ilayna, to ourselves, is what Allah, we draw him into ourselves, qabdan yasira, a gentle, easy drawing in. So when you think about what this says, so Allah shows you the sujood of the shadow. Then He gradually shows you, if the light is there, so that you can see it, shows you how gradually that shadow is coming in. And so Yusuf Ali says, so the shadow, when the sun, is like at the zenith, there's no shadow, right? He says, so where did it go? He says it's absorbed back into the being that created it. Meaning it's absorbed back into you, me. And Allah says this is a qabdan yasira, it's a gentle drawing in. He's drawing it back, calling it back to the source. Yusuf Ali said, in his tafsir, said, every second the shadow is changing in position and moving closer to the source from which it came. And then he said, actually, every fraction of a second. And somebody said, how could that possibly be? And I said, well, how could it possibly not be? That if it's going from that long, seemingly flat, but remember the shadow is 3D, seemingly flat entity that it is, till it shortens till you no longer see it. It didn't just jump from there to here. It gradually happened, and it happened at increments of fractions of seconds. Now they talk about nanoseconds, right? Not even a fraction, like a part of a second you can't even measure, nanoseconds. So that this is something that is happening all the time. And then it begins to separate again and go back the other way to make sujood in the other direction. So this is the will of Allah. It says if we wanted, we'd have made him sit still, but we didn't. We want to show this shadow as a sign. So in the tafsir it says that in this play of light and shade in the creation of Allah, we have to see or think about some of the mysteries of light and shade, and remember that Allah is light. That you and I, we're only shadows. We're only shadows of the true reality, and the only true reality is Allah. And so as the shadow is absorbed into what created and projected the shadow, we will be absorbed to our Creator. We will be taken back. And we are being taken back. From the time that we are born, we have this gradual retraction to what created us, which is Allah. So so it says all material substances are only shadows. And the only true reality is Allah. And in this, there's a book called The Study Quran. It's a tafsir that says the shade or the shadow refers to the time between from the Fajr until the sun rises, and that's the first sujood of the shadow. And then it is again as the sun, we're getting towards the Maghrib. So it says, just as the sun moves gradually through the sky, the shade gradually, or the shadow gradually changes. Again, the sun is very gradually moving. You don't see it, but you notice the difference of positions, right? So the shadow is gradually moving just as the sun is gradually moving. The sun is only an indicator. So let's see. The gentle withdrawal, just the commentaries. Okay, so what I said, and I'll read what I wrote at the end of my own notes here, and hopefully we will have some questions. So I said, having collected these commentaries, which is all that I really did, and looked some stuff up and just in, dictionary and Wikipedia just to see what is being said. Having collected the commentaries, the tafsir of Ibn Kathir, the tafsir of Yusuf Ali, and the study Quran, and I looked into, I have one that's called the Enlightened Commentary. It's an Iranian tafsir. I didn't find much there. But it has stimulated my own inner study and opinions, which I'm still developing. So what I want to say is that shadows and shade are subtle realities given to us by Allah to stimulate our intellect, to make us think, and to cause us to become more aware of beings that exist between this world and the unseen. The shadow is somewhere between the heavy physical reality and the total imperceptible reality. The shadow is in between there. We can perceive it when Allah allows us to perceive it. But the true ghaib, you cannot perceive. So it's in between there. And they are indicators to us, as the sun is an indicator of their existence. So the shadow is an indicator to me of something about myself. As the sun indicates or shows up the shadow shows up something about myself. And what the shadow is showing to me is the need for the voluntary sujood to Allah Ta'ala, because the shadow is doing it. They point us to the gradual withdrawal of creation to the Creator. Remember that every second, from the time that we are born, every second is drawing us closer to that withdrawal, that complete withdrawal from the physical world. This is what's happening, and the shadow is showing how that happens gradually. So they point us to the gradual withdrawal of creation to the Creator, of the nightly return of the soul to her Lord. I hope that everyone's aware of that in the night, in some part of every night, that every soul is taken back to Allah for whatever brief period. And Allah only knows time. That you find this in Surah Zumar. Because Allah says that Allah takes the souls at death. And those that don't die, He takes in their sleep. And then it says those for whom it's the time for death, He will keep them. The ones, some souls He takes in the sleep, He keeps. And others He sends back ila ajalin musamma, to a particular time that He has written. So these returns are happening for us in every 24-hour period, but also in every 24-hour period there is that gradual permanent return to Allah. Every second we are gradually returning to Allah. And of the ultimate easy withdrawal of each of us. It will be easy for Allah to take us, because we're only shadow beings. We are shadow beings, and what I put about us, I said, the ultimate easy withdrawal of each of us, shadow beings who poorly reflect the light. That we are poor reflections of the light of Allah Ta'ala, but each day we should be, inshallah, increasing or improving our reflection of Allah. That's our responsibility as a believer, is to improve how we reflect the light of Allah. And one of the things I want to say before I bring this to an end and open for questions is, in You know, the Arabic language is quite amazing. In the word, dhil, dhillu, and the verb, dhalla, is the meaning of continuing, like continuing in action, being permanent, persevering in something. The perseverance of the shadow is in the submission to Allah. And then it never fails. It never fails to do that on a daily basis. So that's in the meaning, in the root meaning of this noun, is that meaning of continuance and persevering. And the shadow will always, regularly, daily, in fractions of seconds, be in complete submission to Allah. And this is something that is, again, a reminder of how we need to be in that continual submission to Allah Ta'ala, and joining with all other things that remain in that condition of permanent submission and the state of Islam. And that's what Islam means, that willing submission to Allah. But Allah says this will happen willingly or unwillingly. We will do it. We will do it. So, and in the end, we know we have nothing. We cannot stop death. We cannot stop our return. We cannot change our accounting. So we will submit. And so we might as well be of those who will willingly do it, as the shadow, as the malaik, as the other beings that are willingly submitting themselves to Allah in sujood. So I just have a dua to end this, and it says, from Surah Al Imran, ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Our Lord, don't let our hearts deviate after you have guided us, and grant us mercy from yourself, and you are the one who is ever and repeatedly giving. You are the one who is liberal in bestowing. So hopefully you have questions or comments or anything. And I'll tell you, I will never look at my shadow the same way again. I know that.
I have a question. What's the difference between shadows and shade?
So the shadow is a projection of the being, of a being, and the shade is just where light is not coming through. So you can be under a roof and you have some shade from light.
Mm-hmm.
Shade is the like a barrier between light and you, but the shadow is a projection of a being, of an object.
So the shade is like
Absence of light,
okay.
where light cannot come through.
Okay. One thing.
But sometimes shadow and shade can be, like if you get in the shadow of a tree, you say you're in shade, right?
But the shadow of the tree.
But that's the shadow.
Okay. Now, here's one thing. You said at night,
Mm-hmm.
when there's no sunlight,
Mm-hmm.
where we at? It's maybe sunlight somewhere else. But where we are, it's nighttime.
Mm-hmm.
You said the shadow?
Yeah, the shadow exists. The shadow exists. See, it's not, light does not create the shadow. Light indicates that the shadow is there. The shadow's there all the time.
But when the light is there, you can see the shadow.
When the light is there, you can see the shadow. Yes.
But when it's not there, you can't see the
see
shadow.
it.
Because it seems like to me, the reason you can't see the shadow is because there's no light.
Well, yes, because the light is an indicator, meaning the light is showing you that the shadow exists. But the shadow does not disappear.
Yusuf said that the sun has an effect on the shadow. That's what you said.
Yusuf Ali said that the sun is a guide to the shadow. That was the way that he translated dalilan. Dalilan is guide, but all the others that I read said indicator. So when you look up that word, dalla, it's like to show something, to point something out. You're pointing it out. So the sun points it out and shows you the movement, but the sun does not not changing the movement of the shadow. The sun's not doing that. Allah's doing that. So the sun is not the one that is in charge of the movement of the shadow. No.
Because you were saying another thing, you said at the zenith.
There's no
That's
shadow.
directly
Mm-hmm.
over your head, right?
Right,
It's no shadow.
no shadow.
And did you say,
But there
Yeah.
will be shade. You can find shade even though there's no shadow.
did you say that when the sun reaches its zenith, everything makes sujood?
Mm-hmm. That was in the tafsir.
Now, isn't that the time that we don't make prayer?
When it's right at the zenith, yeah, you have to wait till it passes over, yeah.
Oh, okay. But I thought somebody was saying that everything makes sujood.
That's what in the tafsir,
But
yeah.
if everything makes sujood, but we're not supposed to make sujood.
Mhm. And the reason
At that
is,
time,
yeah,
right?
the reason is because even the shayateen, there are times when they are making sujood. And Allah tries to prohibit the Muslim from making sujood at the time when the evil ones are making sujood. So they have their time of worship also. So that's why he says, don't like, as the sun starts to rise, because they worship the sun. And then when it gets to the zenith, see, they have times where they're actually worshiping the sun. So when it's first, like, in that early rising, they're worshiping the sun, at the zenith, worshiping the sun, and get too close to the sunset, they start worshiping the sun. So the sun worshipers are worshiping at that time, so it's like stay away from those times, because otherwise you're joining with them.
And when it's setting, the same thing.
Yeah. You know, I heard on the radio this morning, I don't know if any of you listened to On Being. There was a woman on there, and so the hostess, the Krista Tippett, her name is, was asking her about her childhood, about her religious, the influence of her, childhood on her spiritual self. And she said, well, I'm part of a minority group. No, she's a Zoroastrian, and it's like, you don't even hear about Zoroastrians. They're mentioned in the Quran, but I mean, you don't hear about Zoroastrians. And that was the religion of the people of Persia, at the time when, but she said it's a monotheistic religion. She said it's one of the minority monotheistic religions that people don't know about. She's from India, so there's a lot of them. I think she said about 50,000 maybe in India, and then others in different parts of the world. So you have, there are people, but if they're Zoroastrian, if they are monotheistic, Allah knows best. But I thought that Zoroastrians, weren't they the fire worshippers? Who's the fire worshiper? There's one group that worships fire. So there are times when different groups are worshiping, and Allah tries to keep us away from those particular times.
Technically, Zoroastrians are monotheists, but the reason why I kind of am hesitant about it in the Tawheed is different, because they put the devil or shaitan on a level similar, close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They call God Mazda, Ahura Mazda. But I forgot what they call shaitan, but it's like between good and evil. So he's on a level higher than he should be. So you said it's mentioned in the Quran, is that the Sabaeans?
Sabians, no. Where are they? It might be just in the tafsir when Allah is talking about different. The Sabians are a different group
It's in the tafsir.
in the tafsir. I know it's in the tafsir of Yusuf Ali when he mentions the Zoroastrians.
And the part about Allah taking your soul every night.
Every night.
The Prophet used to make dua when he woke up, to thank Allah for giving him his soul back.
Right.
After taking it from him.
Right. Every night it happens at some point. And this one woman told me, she said, well, I don't sleep. She has insomnia, and she said, sometimes I only sleep a half hour. I said, that's enough time. Allah doesn't need like a whole lot of time to take your soul and send it back, because time with Allah is totally different than our time. Remember, it says like a day with Allah is 50,000 years. So, it's like that 2-3 minutes could, be like long time in our time. So, but it happens every night. It says every night, that the soul is taken. There's another thing, there was a question asked to the Prophet, said, where does the sun go when it sets? Now, we know more about maybe the rotation and revolving aspect of our earth and going around the sun and all that than maybe what they knew at that time. And he said the sun goes to make sujood to Allah. Now, when you think about it, because somebody said, well, but when the sun is setting for us, it's rising for somebody else. But no, when it's setting for us, there's a whatever you want to call, like we call it like latitude, longitude. There's there's a measure of the area for which it's setting for other people too, right? And there's a time in that setting. But then when it finishes all of that setting, it will come to a time when there's going to be the rising, you know. So in between that final setting and the rising, Allah, the Prophet said that the sun goes to make sujood to Allah. How and what and, you know, how, Allah knows, but that's what the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And to remember that everything has a sujood to Allah. There's nothing that doesn't. So, you know, tell you another interesting thing that the Levant said, the only celestial bodies that make a shadow on the earth are the sun, the moon, and either at different times Jupiter or Venus. None of the other planets make shadows on the earth. Only the sun, the moon, and either Jupiter or Venus. So, you know, there are reasons.
I know it's interesting you were saying like you can walk into something when it's dark. I was just on a cruise and I was jogging around 4 in the morning. You can jog outside and you couldn't tell the difference between the sky and the sea. It was that black. And then when it started lightening a little bit out there, so I went back in.
Yeah, that's the thing, you know. So, but it's not that those things are not there and in their complete reality, but you just can't see it. So that's the thing about our shadows.
So it's like the sun is like flashing a light on it.
Yeah.
Exposing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I enjoyed everything. I got to meet a brother.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khair for coming. Jazakumullah khair. Any other comments or questions? So we are surrounded by this consciousness, you know, this consciousness and ourselves, and things that are related to ourselves, making this ibadah to Allah. I know they thinking, like, what's wrong with you? You know, what's wrong with, like, when we're not regular, when we're not good in our worship to Allah. So may Allah help us, because, you know, the longer that I exist in this deen and the more I move around, the more I meet people and find people that are very neglectful of their salat. And, you know, for whatever reasons. Some of them are just like, you know, they have doubts about Allah, but they're still Muslim, but it's like, well, why would Allah let this happen to me, you know? What difference does it make if I pray or not? You know, this type of thing. And they get very, very neglectful, and may Allah help them and bring them out of it. So, Jazakumullah khair.